Streams actually have three distinctive microhabitats: riffles, runs, and pools. And I always say it in that order because that goes from, there is an order to it. The riffles are going to be shallower areas where the water runs really, really rapidly, and you can actually see a lot of bubbling and motion on the top of the water. That's where Tyler's standing now. He is in a riffle. A run is going to be a deeper, much deeper area, like right there on that side of the stream channel. And a run is going to have not as much turbulence, in other words, not as much mixing of the water. So it's going to have smaller size bottom sediment, or in other words, the rocks on the bottom are going to be much, much smaller, finer rocks. And there's not going to be as much oxygen in the water because it's not mixing around as much with the surface. And so that means that the organisms that live in the runs are going to have to be able to deal with smaller bottom rocks and less oxygen. And then pools are going to be much deeper areas where they're protected and there's not a heck of a lot of water flow. And this is where you're going to find much, much finer mud. I know that it doesn't look like I'm really in a deep area, and that's because this is a sheltered spot, but not very deep right in here. As I go there, it gets much deeper underneath that overhang that's over there, and it's really going to be fine mud on the bottom instead of the larger rocks, which is where Tyler was just standing and sampling. So we're going to have very, very different animals and different algae as well growing in the riffles, the runs, and the pools. Typically, I'm most interested in sampling the riffles because that's where you get a lot of your mayflies, caddisflies, stoneflies, your larger, they're called macroinvertebrates, larger animals without backbones. Fishermen love to fish in the pools because that, with their much deeper areas and the quiet, slower moving water, that's where you will oftentimes find your larger fish. And when you look down in the dirt at the bottom, it's very muddy and you'll oftentimes have worms there. And in the runs, it's kind of in between both of those. Some fish will be in the runs, typically different fish species than are in the pools. And when you go to the riffles, there are fish there too, but those fish are going to be very, very tiny and small so they can fit in that shallow water. And they're usually going to be fish that are down living on the bottom rather than swimming up in the water column. And that's not going to be big enough to feed a family for dinner. So your biggest fish are typically going to be in your pools.